This is Akashvani Kohima. Listeners, we bring you a special live discussion on the Union Budget 2025-26, Focus Nagaland.
Hello, dear listeners, and good evening. Today, the regional news unit of Akashvani Kohima brings to you a special live discussion where we will take a deep dive into the Union Budget 2025-26, and yes, with a special focus on how it impacts our state of Nagaland. I am your host, Meyase. Stay with us for an insightful conversation ahead. Well, listeners, you are tuned into Akashvani Kohima, FM 103 MHz and primary channel 639 kHz. You can also listen to this program on News on Air app, available on your Android and iPhones. All right, the Union Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, unveiled her 8th straight Union budget on the 1st of this month. And it has been perceived as a fairly positive budget, especially for the middle class, with tax reliefs and incentives across several sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, and micro, small, and medium enterprises, to name a few. However, there have been also criticisms that the budget did not address demand problem, lack of purchasing power due to employment, and shrinking wages. Well, today we are here with an esteemed panel of experts who will talk us through the key takeaways, the challenges, and the opportunities that lie ahead for Nagaland in the context of this year's budget. First up, we have Dr. Moalemba Jamir, Associate Editor of the Morung Express, a senior journalist whose extensive experience in regional reporting and the media scene will help shed light on the public understanding and responses to the Union budget. We are also joined by Dr. Evothung Ezung, Associate Professor, Department of Economics at Kohima College, Kohima, whose insights will help break down the implications and challenges for Nagaland in light of the Union budget. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to a prolific and healthy interaction with you all. So listeners, let's dive into the conversation with our esteemed panelists. To kick things off, Dr. Evothung, I'll come to you first. Could you briefly give us your initial impression on this year's Union budget? And what are the key takeaways when you look at it from a national standpoint?
First of all, nice for having me in these panel discussions. After analyzing all the pros and cons of the budget 25-26, I could pick out some of the important points which has been different from the last year budget. This year we have an income tax cut, which means people will have more money in their hands, which means they'll have more purchasing power, which will automatically induce more demand and more production. The second takeaway points in this budget is that because of this tax cut, another point to be noted is that government is going to fork on, which means they are going to sacrifice 1 lakh crores of rupees, which means less of what they have received last year. However, government is so optimistic and they are so sure that this foregone tax revenue can be recovered from the GDP. And another point is that they have still given high emphasis on this capital expenditure. Now, this capital expenditure is nothing but an expenditure, especially on the constructions of roads, bridge, railway, ports, all these, because these are some of the key components when we talk about economic growth and development. And without all these, developing all these capital infrastructure, what India is dreaming for will never be achieved. And another point to be taken note is that they have focused this budget and the policies have focused on employment generation. And for that, they have taken a lot of initiative, especially on skilling the young Indians people. Because we know a country will achieve its prosperity, or it will achieve towards its target when these young people are well equipped, well skilled to acquaint themselves with any kind of task or work that they are going to take up. Another important key points in which this union budget have addressed is on the regulatory reforms. Now, these regulatory reforms, it have been stopped for. They were not in action for 10 years. So this time they have taken up this issue. Now, these regulatory reforms is nothing but this is something to do with an industry. Now, under these regulatory reforms, several committees will be formed. Formed, and they will have to oversee. They will have to look all the pros and cons and all the difficulties faced by the investors. Because in the overall of this budget, they have also given a lot of emphasis on the investment. So until and unless these investors are given the best facilities, or they are free from obstacles, if they have a lot of regulatory system which will not induce, or the very purpose of putting up an investment a priority will never be achieved. So these are some of the key points in which 2025-26 have highlighted, which is completely different from 24-25 budget.
Moa, would you like to add to that?
For me, one of the striking features, as expounded by Dr. Ezung, was the tax relief that was announced. Maybe we don't know whether the upcoming or the election in Delhi has influenced the decision, but still then a tax cut has been something which many middle classes or lower income group has been demanding or sort of voicing out. So that's a big relief for them. And also the expounding on this Sabka Vikas notion of and making Vikshit Bharat India by 2047, the budget focus on four specific engine of growth, right? Like agriculture, MSME, export, and the other one is investment. So I feel that if we look from the national perspective, I'm a little bit, cautiously optimistic that there can be some development, and there will be the engine of growth would propel India to the vision of 2047, develop India, and whether it will fulfill it remains to be seen. But as a whole, it's a fairly positive if we look at the announcement and as well as the budget speech and the atmosphere that has been generated around so far.
Yes. Those are some interesting points that you have brought out. All right, now zooming into Nagaland. Mr. Moa, from your perspective, how do you see the budget broadly impacting the Northeast region as a whole, and particularly our state of Nagaland?
I was expecting, as in not positively, but in a way, that the government of India will announce some special packages for Northeast and particularly for Nagaland. Because if we all know, the state of Nagaland has been demanding to the Finance Commission as well as the Northeast Council, for that matter the government of India, for the completion of this High Court complex also, as well as one-time special financial package to do away with the so-called accumulated deficit that has been accumulated over the years. So if that was announced, it would have been a very welcoming step. Other than that, as we all see, we come under the overarching donor ministry, right? Department for Development of the Northeast.
Yes.
So as per the budget estimate, the budget for the allocation for the ministry has been raised by over 47%. So by at face value, it is very positive, and that seems like a big increase, right? It increased to around the budget statement was 5915. So, but if we look at the previous budget estimate, it was also 5865. If we looking at the both budget estimate and of last year and this year, the increase is quite minimal. I think it's 0.25. And looking from the actual allocation, that is revised estimate that was announced during this time, it was 4006 crore. So from looking from that point of view, there has been a substantial increase. But I was quite wondering why the revised actual allocation was quite less than what was announced from before in the earlier budget that was presented in July. So are the northern state not utilizing their allocated fund very well, or is there some deductions in allocation? These are some of the questions we can discuss as we go about our discussion.
Brought up some important points here, especially on the one-time financial buyout and on the allocation for the region. So also, you have also mentioned that, and we have heard from the finance minister when she announced the union budget, she had not mentioned Nagaland specifically in her speech. But are there any particular allocations or provisions or measures that she has announced that you are particularly looking forward to?
I hope the regional connectivity scheme, the UDAN scheme, the finance minister was saying that it will be enhanced and increased. So basically, it's targeted towards unconnected areas, especially in the hilly areas in the northeast area. So I hope the state of Nagaland will also benefit in terms of more flights, connectivity to different regions, as well as development of new helipads. And also, I think we are also demanding a green field near Kohima also, right? So I mean, maybe there's some issues regarding that, but I hope they will get a clearance in the near future. Also, I forgot to mention regarding the Indian Institute of Science and Research, which was announced way back. So, I mean, maybe I have to get back. It's it to be materialized, right?
Okay.
So that these are some of the issues that need to be, should have been, in my opinion.
Holding on to that thought,
Yeah.
we'll come back to that. So, talking about some key sectors that are getting attention this year, Dr. Evothung, if you could take this. The union budget has mentioned agriculture, MSME, investment and exports as the 4 powerful engines for development, as Dr. Moa has mentioned earlier also. How does Nagaland fit into this national framework?
Regarding about these 4 sectors, I feel, just in my own personal view, this tourism can be considered as one of the primary sector in which our Nagaland government can prioritize. The world knows that Nagas are known for their hospitality. Of course, when we talk about the tourism, it's that the hospitality will not work enough, but we have a lot of potential or untapped resources where, especially under this tourism, where we can explore to a maximum. And in the recent trend, when we see about a tourism economy or a tourism sector, it's going in a very upward trend, which means there are so many factors behind this that if I am to mention some, the research or the studies have found that those people or those community or those country who involves or take a lot of time on travel or tourism, their life expectancy increase. That is one important factor. And another important factor is that they begins to know more about the world and beyond. So in this present generation or in this present world, many peoples are dying to know more about which they have not known. So, and if we are to discuss about a tourism sector in Nagaland, we cannot always think about just about the hornbill, the 10 days festival. That is also a part of a component. But we can also frame like a niche tourism, which a small group of people can come and witness or maybe try to explore some unknown things in which they have never heard, like those villages in Mon district, where the moment you try to let people know that this whole house is divided into lies into two international boundaries, that tag itself makes people to amaze. So which means we need a lot of an advertisement, digital marketing. We can also call us a digital marketing. And then another one, facing with all these infrastructure challenges. I think even in the scheme, the ministry, the budget has clearly mentioned about promoting a tourism. Now, when we talk about tourism, it is to be taken into a very careful way because it will have both positive and negative. Now, in the negativity side, usually if our government is not very cautious, it can bring a lot of bad things or bad elements, or it can bring a lot of damages even in the society, or it can even hinder, or it can just destroy even our good cultures and all this. But on one side, we must also, when we are to promote tourism, especially in a state like Nagaland, everybody talks about ILP. Now, I think this is one hurdles where we have been pondering upon. The state government have been trying on this. And in my opinion, or in my hearsay, I can sometimes hear from the people that those agencies who are implementing this IPL, they are making, which means very ineffective or not very accountable. So I think if we can relax, because when we talk about this ILP, one of the obstacles for a tourist to come to Nagaland, this ILP was introduced in different contextual during those days. But now trends have changed. Since we are living in the world of LGP globalization, I think such kind of restrictions need to be addressed by the state government. Again, another point to be noted over here is that our people, since we have a lot of advantage when we talk about tourism to prosper, because we don't have any language barrier. Any tourist who wants to visit Nagaland, I'm sure they don't have any difficulties in visiting the state, because we are all, even those people living in the rural places, at least they can communicate, or they can try to they can communicate at least with a broken English or maybe with a broken Hindi. So the tourism, the tourist advantage is that those national tourists or maybe the international tourists will not have much obstacles in communicating or try to getting some idea. So in order to promote this tourism, when this budget is emphasizing to give more of priority, I think our department or maybe the state government should think over it. We have to think for a long term, because if we look at the present, in the present context, we always policymakers always try to address the problem only for a very short term, which means they are yet to identify the exact cost. So if we really want to prosper, or if we really want to develop this tourism sector, I think we have to think it in the long term. Like people used to talk about our road connectivity. Visionaries or those policymakers, they could think only for 10 days, like the Hornbill. So I think if we can think for 10 years or maybe for 15 years as such, I think we don't need to keep on spending the resources again and again over the same project or over the same. Instead, we can keep on expanding to we can develop both horizontally and vertically. And in that way, I think that is what I could see a lot of prospect on tourism. The second point I would like to mention is on this small scale and medium scale enterprises. Geographically, most of the northeastern state other than Assam, we are not feasible with a large scale manufacturing investment. To establish those big scale industry is a big challenge. We are faced with so many obstacles. So taking those things into consideration, I think introduction, or which means giving more importance on this MSME, Ministry of Small Scale and Medium Scale Enterprises, will really have a benefit on the Nagas as a whole. But here lies the questions. How do we utilize these resources? That is big questions. Whether it goes to the right person, or to what extent do we have this accountability and transparency? That is a very important component factor that we have to take into consideration. And from the common people, I think we also have to change our thoughts, or we call it as a concept, that we Nakas, we always think that when whatever government give us is at free of cost. So I think even in the school level or in our whole education system, we are taught with only the fundamental rights, and we are yet to know about the fundamental duties. So whatever government give us, I'm sure in the long run, a time may come when the central government may stop funding us with all this. So it is an opportunity that we must have to think in that way, that we have to use all this aid, we have to use all this subsidy to be self-sufficient. Then only we can give back even to the government. I think that is one key point in which I would like to emphasize on this MSME component.
You have really rightly said so. On that note, we have some reactions to the budget coming in from some youth. Let us hear from them now.
One thing I like about this year's union budget is it emphasizes on increased funding for healthcare infrastructure and educational initiatives, and Nagaland's challenges in healthcare and poor education is known by all, so I believe the emphasis will prove beneficial for Nagaland as well.
I am Haroni Lotha and I study tourism. This year budget focuses on tourism for job growth, offering Murda loans for homestays and developing top tourist spots with states. So with Nagaland's rich culture and natural beauty, these steps could help boost local tourism and the economy.
We have heard from them on the tourism front. We have heard from Dr. Ezung about the proposals that the union budget has placed. On this, you have also mentioned about the ILP and the creating a niche tourism. So on this topic, I would like to come to you, Mr. Moa. The union budget has proposed development of top 5 destinations on a challenge basis in the tourism front. They also prescribe that the states will need to provide land to build the essential infrastructure. In a scenario when if Nagaland were to receive this incentive, how do you see this panning out for the people of Nagaland and for the state government, if you can comment on that? And Dr. Ezung was mentioning the ILP issue, and then we have a lot of cry on the PAP, protected area regime these days. We also have a unique issue of land acquisition among our local communities. So keeping all these points into consideration, what are your thoughts on this? Dr. Moa, please.
I think that this issue is the issue of agriculture and tourism is closely related with the issue of unemployment, particularly youth unemployment and educated unemployment. Right? So over the years, we have seen that Nagaland has been one of the highest unemployment rates in India.
Yes.
And the latest, the last PLFS has said, after decreasing for 1 year, it increased during the year ending July 2024. So at that time, it was around educated unemployment was around 27%, and this youth unemployment was around 13.4%, and the general unemployment was 7.4%. It seems very low, but it is, if we compare it to the national level, which is hovering around, the general level is hovering around 3%, and the other is below 10%, then that's present a very challenging scenario.
True.
And if we have seen over the years that this has been a persistent problem facing the people of Nagaland, or the youth, especially the youth educated of the Nagaland. I have argued in my some of my ratings before that can the tourism and agriculture and allied sector can serve as a way out for the state to tackle this unemployment problem. I have 2 or 3 caveats to that. One is that, as rightly pointed out by Dr. Ezung, our tourism right now is a seasonal centric kind of tourism. In fact, in 2023, as per Union Ministry of Tourism data, Nagaland received just over 1 lakh domestic tourists. So if we look into that context, the Hornbill would have taken at least 80,000 footholds of that total. So basically, nearly 80% is received on 10 days of the Hornbill, and the other is
364 days.
other 364 days. So that's a big gap, and it shows that we are not fully harnessing our potentials and other things. Secondly is that agriculture in the allied sector. We often talk about organic this thing, and how we are still are agriculturally dependent economy. But one thing that gives us a picture is about, if we look at the e-Shram dashboard, which kind of presents unorganized registry of an organized worker, and in over that, Nagaland has over around 2 lakhs, I think 2 lakhs something so far in that registration. And if we look at that, most of the occupation that is given is agriculture, almost 80 or maybe more than 80%, I suppose. And that now the e-Shram dashboard has stopped giving income level, but before they used to give. So one data shows that nearly over 90% of that were earning just around, below 10,000 per month.
Okay.
So that's barely a subsistence level at this point of time, right? So in Nagaland, the center can also make different policies, but at the same time, we also need to focus on state-centric tailored policies, which is not seasonal, but which is a all year round affair, as well as agriculture, which can give subsistence level as well as give a sort of comfortable income to the public, to the citizens. Concerning the ILB issue, I feel that ILB to some extent is needed, but it should be properly streamlined and regulated, because we have the government used to start checking ILB when maybe some organizations, due to some issues, began to voice out against. Other than that, it's more or less, you go to any other train stations or any airport, there's hardly any checks about this ILB issue. We have rightly mentioned about that BAB, protected area permit. So again, the Home Ministry has recently reimbursed the permit, right, for foreigners to come. So, and rightly, Nagaland government has also voiced out against the move and asked the center to reconsider the decision. But we need to find a policy where we can streamline this process in a very productive way, because demographically we are a little bit challenged. So we have a certain cultural diversity. So it should be protected to some certain extent also. But at the same time, it should not be so restrictive that it impacts different sectors of.
You were talking about the agricultural front. The Union Budget has mentioned it as one of their engines to a developed India.
Yes.
And in that, it has introduced a slew of initiatives and measures to support the agricultural community. We have the Dhanya Krishi Yojana and other such expansion of Jal Jeevan Mission, for example, and other such measures that it has mentioned. On the other side, regarding the employment and of youth in the rural region, the allocation for MG, NRE, GA has almost remained stagnant.
Very stagnant.
In this budget. So in that scenario, moving to the government's focus on youth and employment, we have heard Prime Minister Modi has consistently said that youth are the energy of the engine for the future of India. How, in your opinion, I'll throw this question to both of you, has this year's budget addressed the aspirations of young people in the state?
Let me take the first privilege of this discussion. According to the World Bank report publication, we have seen there is a positive correlation between youth empowerment or empowering youth and then the country prosper. Now, when we look in this context and bring back to India for a reflection, for this budget or whenever there is a policy that is being announced in Delhi, most of the time the focus, or maybe they take a points only mainly from the mainstream Indias or from the mainland. Now, in many of the cases, they have overlooked or they have failed to take into considerations of the country is so diverse. We know that India is one of the most diverse country in the world, where each and every community and within the community and within a society, there is again a lot of subdivergences there. Now, when we talk about employing or empowering the youth by skill development or maybe by through an education, I think here there is some mismatch. That's what I could feel. Like Dr. Moa have rightly stated, our Nagaland unemployment rate is beyond the national level when we talk about in terms of a percentage. Now here I would like to emphasize why our Nagas youth are unemployed in spite of being considered to be a literate or an educated. Here, because there is a mismatch. Now for a country as a whole, their policy of achieving in that the country as a macro level is different. Now if at all India wants to achieve, they have to go to each and every micro level, which means part by part, depending on the region, depending on their belief, depending on their society, depending on the social structure, how it is being set up. Now, if such is the case, then I'm sure there won't be any mismatch. Now, for the Nagas, if we are trained how to make an example like a dosa or maybe a chapati or all such things, I'm sure our Nagas will not be interested. But if we were given an option, or if there is a flexibility that we Nagas can also adopt our own policy, our own framework, and if we were given a liberty to according to the need, what is being required. Instead of making for chapati, idli, dosa, if we were given a training of how to work in the stone or maybe in the paddy field or maybe those resources which are available in Nagaland, I think the very purpose of this empowering the youth will have a very fruitful one. Now, another point in which I would like to mention here is when we talk about unemployment, economically, let me go into deep about the definition. If I am to say about an unemployment, strictly there are 4 different kinds of unemployment. One is voluntary unemployment, one is disguised unemployment, one is educated unemployment, one is a seasonal unemployment. Now, in the case of Nagaland, I can say that if we are to define strictly of an employment, it is something that when we define about employment, it is a person who is willing to work but doesn't have any work to do. So that is an unemployment. But for the case of Nagaland, we have a lot of works to do, but our youths are not willing to do the work. So it becomes voluntary unemployment. So here I would like to emphasize, especially basing on this budget, is that if we were given a flexibility, and I'm sure the ministry has also given us some flexibility of each and every state in the Northeast to frame our own modalities, to frame our own policies according to our requirement. And if we can put forward this one, and then if we can spend the resources on the need-based skilling, I think we will not have any problem. That's what I feel and what we can take away from this budget.
Closely related to what you are saying is that state needs very state-centric tailored policies. At the same time, the issue of transparency, accountability, and governance is also very important. You have touched that about a little bit, whom the various funds are going. You have touched upon that. I think it's very important because most of the time it may happen that some beneficiaries are getting the different schemes that is being available for various employment works or other economic opportunities. So I feel that without solving the issue of accountability, transparency, and good governance, no matter how much fund is allocated to Nagaland or for that matter to the Northeast, the impact won't be not as expected. Again, I often wonder, is our preoccupation with government sector job a reason behind all this high employment ratio? Because as Dr. Ezung has rightly pointed out, Nagaland is considered as a land of opportunities for an outsider. But here we are talking about the locals having the highest unemployment rate. So while this periodic labor force survey was, while analyzing this report, I always wondered, is it because Nagaland government in Nagaland youth are saying that they are not employed if they are not government employee? So, but looking at some of the parameters, it seems to suggest that if you are employed one way or other, economically or gainfully employed, half of the 365 days of a year, you are considered to be employed. So it can be include the disguised employment, seasonal unemployment that he was talking about, that Dr. Ezung was talking about. So it's a very curious scenario which need to be investigated further so that we get a clear picture.
On that note, this union budget has placed a lot of emphasis on on entrepreneurship and looking at the startup landscape in Nagaland. We also have a lot of youths establishing their own startups and all. We have here an entrepreneur who shared her view on the budget with us. Let's hear from here now.
It's encouraging to see that the government of India still strongly supports the startup ecosystem, and we're happy to see a fresh set of funds is going to be contributed to the fund of funds. There's an expansion of MSME credit to MSMEs in the country. Also happy to see, especially also in the logistics section, where India Post is going to be a logistics hub. So a lot of new initiatives and schemes are seen, and I think it's going to also help startups and entrepreneurs in the state.
Dr. Moa and Dr. Ezung, let's talk about the sustainability of these provisions of these funds that have been coming in for entrepreneurs and startups. What are your thoughts on the sustainability of such programs?
In fact, during the last Man Ki Baat, the Prime Minister was praising about the so-called raise in 200% increase in startup in Nagaland.
Yes.
So, but the number is quite small. Basically, I think it was around 85 as per last year, some data from last year provided by the Ministry of Commerce. So, and if we go to the startup website of Nagaland, there it seems around, the status is around 325. But for them to be officially recognized as startup, it has to go to the center. So from there, where the credit facilities would be available, or so there seems to be a lot of interest, and this is very encouraging. At the same time, we also have noticed that agriculture and MSME has been cited as an engine of growth, right? But I'm wondering whether the increase of this investment criteria for the MSME for all the micro, small, and medium enterprises would be beneficial for the entrepreneurs in Nagaland, because if we look at it was enhanced to 2.5, right? Micro,
Yes.
and the small is, if I'm not mistaken, 25.
Yes.
And the micro is
250.
So I'm wondering whether we have such kind of, or whether our entrepreneurs, youthful entrepreneurs, would have the opportunity to get access to credit facilities, whether they would be limited by this criteria, and whether any conditionality is given, relaxation is given to those, especially those in the hilly areas, because we are usually focused on tourism, agri, and horticultures in all this sector, right? For this and small logistic in all this thing. So hardly the investment might be, I believe I might be wrong, below 1 crore sort of this thing, or up to 1 crore or 2 crores. So this could be this is something which we have to look at the fine print.
Yeah, like I have said earlier, you see, whenever any policies, plans are implemented or announced, they're always based on the national level. If we are to talk about these local entrepreneurships, many of our young entrepreneurs, say Nagas, first thing, they don't know the exact, they have very less knowledge about the market of doing business. That's what I could see in my own experience or in my field. Now, just if you look at the vegetable vendors in Kohima, though they are just vegetable vendors, they survive. Whereas those business, Naga youth business who started with 40-50 lakhs, they fail. Now here, the main reason is because they don't know exactly the nature of the market. And if at all they want to be successful, I think for any entrepreneurs, they have to study the market, whether what the amount of demand, the amount of goods that is likely to be sold in the market, or they should be able to know how the cost and benefit analysis. And in a skilling youth, or maybe in the education systems, we are never taught all this. So these are an extra thing that any Naga entrepreneurs have to study. Because if I'm to cite for some example, why among the local vendors in Kohima, those vegetable vendors coming from Vuka, those women, they seems to be selling at the they seems to be getting the highest profit. I've done little study on this vegetable vendors. Now, one thing that I have witnessed in my observation is when I go and interview, try to get some information. If you ask them what is the price of the vegetables, they will never say that the price, but they'll just give you the tag. Ito vegetable do boka laga se bishi mitha se na. So this is one way we call it an innovation of selling, doing a business. So even for our Naga entrepreneur, I'm sure that very eager. Many of our Nagas are willing to work even in overtime with a whole dedication, but they are yet to come to the track. They are yet to find out what would make them a success. Yeah. So most importantly here, we need a lot of R&D. We call it think tank in Western world, or in India we call it research and development. Now, coming back to the rest in Nagaland, this is very much far behind, and so we could not address the real issue. And I think under this MSME we can see some positive. I'm so positive that so many Nagas will take up this, but I'm not very sure how many of them are going to achieve in this.
Okay, thank you so much. We are having an interesting discussion here, but we are unfortunately running short of time. So, any last thoughts? Any quick last thoughts, so we can wrap up the discussion for today?
Yeah, I should say that the budget or this policy that is announced by our finance minister is one of the best, I should say, and very noblest. But we can never expect, no matter how much or no matter how best that is being shared with us, until and unless people are honest, first thing. And then the people also must also be aware people's participation. And then, like our brother have said, starting from top to the bottom, if we are not honest, if we are not transparent, if we are not accountable, I think even if we are giving the best, it will not bring any automatic changes.
Yes.
So even with what little that we have, if we are honest, if we are dedicated, if we are really serious about it, I think this budget or the policy is quite friendly and very beneficial, which is going to bring a lot of benefits for the Naga as a whole.
My outlook is a little bit dark, I mean, bit slimmer and darker than that. Is that little bit negative in that sense? Is that I'm worried that the budget in absolute terms has not increased allocation to the Northeast in a way that is being expounded. Again, if we look at the expenditure of all the department and the allocation to the Northeast, the revised based on the revised estimate, it seems very high. But based on previous year budget, it's quite low. Right? I mean, it's not so celebratory. And lastly, if we look at the tax exemption that has been given up to 12 lakhs, taxpayers or those filing income tax in Nagaland is, I should say, very quite low. I mean, must be lesser than 30,000 collectively. And out of that, many are getting repaid because if your income doesn't reach certain threshold, you get some rebate, right? So the benefit doesn't seem very much to the people. Overall, while the budget itself is very good, might be good, the lack of a very specific, I mean, developmental funds and package for Nagaland is a big downer for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights and interesting perspective today. Dear listeners, that wraps up our special live discussion on the Union Budget Focus Nagaland. We had a very good discussion with the expert panelists. We had Dr. Moa, Associate Editor of the Morung Express, and Dr. Evothung Ezung, Associate Professor, Department of Economics at Kohima College. It was a pleasure to have you both on the show, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Nice for having us.
So listeners, you have heard from the experts. This program was produced by the Regional News Unit of Akashvani Kohima. Thanks for tuning in. I have been your host, Mary, signing off from the studio now. Stay tuned to Akashvani Kohima.